Mississippi Nights. This is certainly not all of them. There are thousands of artists that perform here. But this gives you a nice sampling of the kinds of shows you could have seen there. It is all over the place. Nirvana played their only St. Louis show at Mississippi Nights just like a week before Nevermind was released, and they rocketed to become the biggest band in the country. But you can see just a couple lines down, Kenny G played Mississippi Nights. AC/DC played Mississippi Nights before they were famous, like 200 people saw them there. Similarly, Meatloaf. Meatloaf had his show at the Heil Auditorium canceled. Mississippi Nights was the only place that was open for the night. So like 200 people saw Meatloaf at the height of his Bat Out of Hell fame playing at Mississippi Nights. You'll see tons of bands here. Our idea with this is that we wanted people to kind of stand here and reminisce the shows they might have been at, maybe end up talking to a stranger who happened to be at the same show you were 30 years ago. Kind of a cool memory sharing moment. And then we also have this book here which lets people leave their own memories of their favorite show at Mississippi Nights. One thing I noticed that was a very special moment for me when we had the member opening the other night. Rich and Mary Frame, the owners of Mississippi Nights, who lent us the sign. They had it in their garage, just sitting there up against the wall. The very first memory we have left in here is from Mary Frame, the owner, and she says, I met my husband there, which is so awesome. I don't think we're going to get many that sweet. But the final case we have here is called Made in St. Louis. This covers some stories of products that are actually made here. So we've heard about the singers and the artists and the venues. This talks about the manufacturing of their music in St. Louis. One of my favorite stories is the story of Bob Heil. If you're interested in big concert sound, you have Bob Heil to thank. Across the 1970s, he became one of the foremost guys who made that sound happen. He built sound systems for the Grateful Dead. He built the Who's Quadrophenia sound system that they used in 1973, which is famous because it had 4 different sets of speakers around an arena that made this huge sound. He worked with the Eagles and Joe Walsh and all of these different, huge 1970s arena rock sort of bands. Bob Heil was one of the people who first came up with the idea for a modular mixer. If you were a touring band and your mixer broke, you were doomed. If you had to send the whole thing away, you couldn't go on to your next show while it was being repaired. This was what kept the whole show running. So Bob Heil came up with the idea for a mixer that would allow you to just take a single channel out, and you could keep going with the rest of your stuff without having to be sidelined from the whole system being sent back to the manufacturer. So if you bought one of Bob Heil's mixers, it came with this suitcase which had a spot for the broken channel, a screwdriver, and a quarter to call Bob Heil on a payphone. And the quarter's still in there. So you would send that whole suitcase to him, he would send you back the broken part all fixed up, and you could put it right back in. So Bob Heil was the first person ever, the first manufacturer ever to be invited to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to display as part of their displays. So he's a huge name. Also one of the guys who invented the talk box. He didn't invent it necessarily, he popularized it and made the talk box into something that was usable on a concert stage. He did that with Joe Walsh of the Eagles when they were just moving around. And he's one of these guys who has like all these stories of incredible people that he's met. But of course the talk box made popular by Peter Frampton and Joe Walsh and Bon Jovi. Even Bruno Mars today uses a talk box. And that was right across the river in Merced, Illinois, where that first happened. So a lot of really cool stories here, even of the sort of manufacturing angle of St. Louis music. We have the story of KDHX, which has been St. Louis's independent radio voice for more than 30 years. Long before that, its origins are actually in a short-lived station called KDNA, which broadcast out of Gaslight Square. It's kind of funny now that 102.5 is like the soft rock station in town, because back in the 1960s, KDNA was playing all sorts of crazy stuff. They would broadcast like Frank Zappa, then it would be African drumming. They would broadcast seances. And of course, this was one of the first places you heard broadcasts about some of the cutting edge topics of the day and some of the things that no other place was willing to touch. They would have broadcasts where they would have people who were gay sit down with people who were straight and have discussions with one another. In the late 1960s, this was not happening pretty much anywhere else around St. Louis. So when KDNA went flat after just 4 years, the sale of the frequency is what ultimately funded KDHX 15 years later. So that's a fascinating story there.